road did indeed lead me home. It is good to be back. Before I begin with our homily this morning, I'd like to share another reading. I come from a tradition where there are a lot of readings. This morning's second reading comes from the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, verses 14 through 19. The Tyler Coles translation. In the beginning, when God herself created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and shadow covered the face of the deep. While a wind from God themselves swept over the face of the waters, then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. So very good. And God separated the light from the shadow. And God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night. And let them be signs for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and to separate the light from the shadow. And God saw that it was good. So very good. And there was evening, and there was morning. Thus ends our reading. As we continue onward in the ever unfolding and frankly exhausting journey that is the COVID endemic, coupled with personal and societal happenings of all sorts, what are we to do? What are we to do with ourselves, with our communities, with the very stories we were raised to know as true but have grown to realize don't fully encompass the truth? What are we to do in these moments of tenderness and calamity, of frustration and joy, in the presence of both stillness and the hustle and bustle of our lives? When so many things have either changed or need to change, what are we to do? As we live into these all too real questions, I offer up this morning's homily entitled Ministry at the Beginning of the World. If you are anything like me, maybe you can remember the beginning of lockdown and all the feelings that it brought with it. I know, because I had some pastoral care calls with some of y'all. That's okay. Those feelings of anxiety and loneliness, the anger and the sorrow. It must have been that first full week during lockdown as I remember struggling with my day-to-day routine. One such morning, I was looking out of my apartment window over Cameron Run, a tributary that feeds into the mighty and murky Potomac River just down the road. As I clutched my coffee cup to my chest, I blurted out, "I wasn't prepared for this." My then roommate, Julia, sitting just across the living room, looked up from her phone and said, "Tyler, ready for what?" I gestured to the window and I said this: I wasn't ready for this. I was ready for the apocalypse, for the doom and the gloom, the fire and the brimstone, the gnashing of teeth, maybe a zombie or two. Not for a beautiful spring morning. There I was, struggling to make sense of the world that I had come to know as it began to fracture and fissure under the pressure of the pandemic and all that it brought with it. In those early weeks and months, I struggled. We struggled. We struggled as our loved ones became sick, as we cared for them and even became sick ourselves. We wrestled with the weight of the world as it played out on the evening news and on Facebook and Instagram. We gave it the best we could as we attempted to keep some semblance of normalcy. And as time went on, we began to hear and maybe even utter, and it's okay if you did, how we just wanted things to go back to normal. Back to the way things were before the virus, before social distancing, before masking, before wiping down groceries, before fighting over toilet paper and paper towels, before worrying about air quality and purity, before inflation, and even before figuring out how to make multi-platform school and church work. You know, the before times. But as is our habit, as creatures of habit, when we reflect back on the past, we so often do so in dichotomies. This is to say, when we think back on past events, we tend to place them solidly in the camps of either totally good or totally bad, given our experience of them. And as I think back on those days, months, and years before the arrival of the pandemic, I am honestly left wondering what was so wholly good about any of them in which we would even want to go back to them. Yeah, I know, I'm going there. Now I know and I honor that when we say that we wish to return to the before times, what we're doing is signaling how our hearts are weary and how we wish we didn't have to concern ourselves with the endemic and the total disruption it is still having on our lives today. But how many times in those before times, and even since then, have we thought to ourselves, this is it. This is the end. Surely it is all done and over with now. And casually naming a few, I can recall the chaos of Y2K. And if you weren't around, that is when we thought, when the calendar went from 1999 to 2000, it was all over, you know, we're gonna party like it's 1999, yeah. There was, of course, the Bush administration, or the Obama administration, or the Trump administration. And then, of course, there was the pandemic itself, and the wars and the genocides that have happened since then, the rise and fall of the economy, the housing crisis, the endless accounts of mass gun violence and natural disasters, and the list goes on and on and on. But as a religious people who routinely gather to wrestle with truth, both new and old, we are taught time and time again in so many ways that the ending of one thing is the beginning of something else. In the sacred story from Genesis, the first of two creation stories we hear, the detailed motions in which God herself proceeds to bring creation into being by breathing life over the murky waters and separating them from what would become the earth. It is the creative imagination and poetic genius of the ancient Israelites as they sought to craft meaning out of the heat and force, the swirling gases and minerals that would become our galaxy. It places humanity not at the center, but as equal participants alongside the heavens and the earth, the shadowy waters and the moving airways, and of course, a multitude of animals. And with no preface, with no explanation given, the plot line of existence just begins in full order. This is what many of us were taught, after all, right? God creates. Full stop. And when said more frankly, God creates from nothing. But when we turn our hearts and minds to the words more closely, what we notice is that God himself didn't create the cosmos and everything that exists within it from nothing, but God instead crafted existence with what was already on hand, with that which already existed, the seemingly separate parts, maybe even the broken parts from the previous creation. There's no question that each of us have faced our own endings before. Heck, some of us are probably facing them right now. But unlike what I was prepared for during the earliest moments of lockdown and have since been reminded, endings can rarely be prepared for. And when they do arrive, they appear in ways different from what we expected them to be. And sometimes those endings and revelations don't come from outside forces, but are self-induced. In Cheers to the End of the World by Elba Morales, they write, sometimes we orchestrate the end of our own worlds. The decision to leave a toxic job, to say yes to trusting a new love, admitting that we need help. There's blessedness, after all, in new beginnings, no matter how difficult that they may be or how they come about. And as change is the one and only real constant, we must meet those moments with as much heart as we can muster within ourselves and can assemble from those around us. As Dr. Elias Ortega, president of Meadville Lombard Theological School, says, facing apocalypse with courage and faith is understanding that it reveals other possible ways of being, of acting, of living in the world while we still have time. In full truth, who we once were is no more. The world as it used to be has perished. For change is constant in the great river of being. For following life is death, and surely following death is life again. Winter gives way to spring, the setting sun gives way to the full moon rising above the horizon, and low tide follows when the water crests upon the shore. There's good news in all of this, because there is always good news. The good news is that we are wading through the waters, carving out new pathways and laying new foundations with old pieces, with formerly broken pieces every day. Are you the same person who you were 3 years ago? But we must do this new rebuilding, this new reimagining, this new creation with intention and imagination, not just for the sake of survival. For this intentional act of imagination requires that we honor all that has come to pass and to take stock of how previous iterations may have shaped us, and then manifest, bring into being a new way that honors all of us going forward. Here then, as Adrienne Marie Brown often says, we must create lives worthy of living. We must create lives worthy of living. Likewise, we must also organize communities worthy of being a part of, as the individual does not live in an isolation, but as a single thread woven into the greater tapestry. For it is in these communities, much like the church is tasked with doing, that we become the co-creation lab of existence, creating ways of deep connection and well-being, bound together in care that hold us through all the endings and new beginnings, the pandemics and apocalypses, the twists and turns still to come. As we move through this next chapter, Into this new world becoming, we must do so guided by a faith anchored in clear and bold values. As our previous president of the UUA once said, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, this is no time for a casual faith. We need new, bold, and clear values. In my own journey as a Unitarian Universalist, in my ministry with other UUs, I detect that we will have to go forward with 3 guides ahead, lest we be tempted, pulled back, really, into the ways of the before time. 3 ways, 3 guides. I know you're note-taking people, so if you want to grab that pen, go for it. Our first guide, slowing down to start small. As we venture into this new world, let us go slow and move with exacting precision. We have been trained to be and to work at a fever's pace. While capitalism is crumbling, it is not dead yet in this new world. But the spirit of life, I believe, is much stronger. And it is begging us, asking us to move different as we are beginning to realize that the God of death, known in the form of free market greed, has an offertory which is too high to bear. By slowing down, we can begin to build up the life-giving pathways which meet the needs of today in more sustainable ways. No more quick fixes for the sake of convenience. Our second guide, relationships. Relationships. Go ahead and look to your neighbor. I know the formerly Baptist will know this trick really well. Look to your neighbor. Do it again and say hello. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. Relationships. We have come accustomed to and even have begun to expect that relationships should be connections of expediency. Superficial at least and vapid at most. In this new world, we must, especially as a religious community that proclaims that our relationships bring us somewhere. We must, in this new world, proclaim the power and truth that is our interdependence. We must let our relationships be both our teacher and our sucker. Relationships of deep meaning will challenge us to grow and will serve as our North Star as we strive towards liberation. After all, when the going gets tough, I do hope you can turn to your neighbor you just said hello to and ask them for help. And our last guide, depth over width. Depth over width. In the before times, we were instructed that we must always build wide. Go wide, be wide, all of which whispered, ignore the depths. If the pandemic has shown us anything, such an approach to our life, to our relationships, to our communities, to our churches, to our own spiritual journeys, width isn't sustainable, let alone useful for when the going gets tough. When we engage the depths of the seas or the heights of the heavens, then we are able to more fully know the nuances and complexities of life. There we can plant our roots deep in the nourishing earth as it provides sustenance and grounding. There we can send our branches towards the heavens as it gives and supplies awe and inspiration. As the elders and teachers of our tradition have reminded us throughout the ages, we are all ministers. We are all ministers who are called to collectively carry the load of life together. For doing so makes the burden of life much lighter. And the new world becoming, following all that has perished, following all that has and even is still being lost. We must faithfully meet this apocalyptic moment as courageously as we can. We must meet this moment with what Walter Brueggemann calls a prophetic imagination. That which calls to mind, body, and spirit a vision of a new world where mutuality and care and generosity are central to our very being and give shape to that holy thing called love. For we, dear ones, we can indeed shape the next creation. After all, we are God's co-creators, they say. For as the prophet and sage Grace Lee Boggs once said, we must transform ourselves to transform the world. For there truly is no better time. There is no better time than this, to drink deeply of the mysteries of transformation. And in so doing, may we prophetically minister to the new world becoming. May it be so.